For over a century, the Holloway family was considered ordinary, respected, wealthy, discreet. But between 1878 and 2001, 14 members of this bloodline died under circumstances that no medical report could fully explain. Some were found hanging where no one could have reached. Some drowned in calm waters they had crossed 100 times before. Others simply collapsed. Without trauma, without illness, without warning. No arrests were made. No crimes were declared. But the pattern remained consistent, precise, and invisible. This is not a story about ghosts. It's about something deeper, something inherited. Their stories were buried in sealed files, forgotten graves, and whispers that never made it to paper. But one question still echoes. What happens when a family tries to erase itself and fails? Before we open the first record, tell us in the comments. Do you believe trauma can be inherited like a name? And if stories like this keep you up at night, subscribe. We're just getting started. The Holloway family arrived in Massachusetts in 1871, when industrialist Thomas Holloway purchased a sprawling estate outside Boston. Thomas was unremarkable, a successful businessman, a faithful husband, a distant father. Nothing in historical records suggests he understood what he was bringing with him across the Atlantic. Or perhaps he did, and that's why the family photographs from this period show a man whose eyes never quite meet the camera. The Holloways kept to themselves, explains historian Dr. Eleanor Pierce, who has studied the family extensively. They were respected in the community, contributed to local charities, attended church regularly. But there was always something reserved about them, as if they were protecting a secret. That secret began to surface on November 19, 1878. Jonathan Holloway, Thomas's eldest son, was discovered by his wife Sarah shortly after midnight. According to police reports, Sarah had been awakened by what she described as a sound like heavy rain, though the night was clear. When she entered Jonathan's study, she found him hanging motionless from the central beam. What followed was the first documented impossibility in the Holloway case. The room was undisturbed. The furniture remained in place. There was no ladder, no chair, nothing Jonathan could have stood on to reach the beam. The ceiling was 13 feet high. Jonathan stood 5 feet 11 inches. Police investigators were baffled. "We've recreated the scenario multiple times," explains forensic analyst Martin Grayson. "A man of Jonathan's build simply could not have reached that beam without assistance or equipment. And yet, there he was. Even more disturbing were the marks found on the beam itself. Not just from the rope that killed Jonathan, but circular impressions that forensic experts now believe were footprints, as if Jonathan had walked across the ceiling before his death. The official cause of death: suicide. The method: unexplained. This might have remained a curious footnote in local history if not for what happened 10 years later. On February 3, 1888, Margaret Holloway, Jonathan's eldest daughter, was found dead in her bedroom at age 20. The medical examiner's report contains photographs too disturbing to show here. Margaret's mattress had been completely consumed by fire. Her body, severely burned, lay in the center. But nothing else in the room showed any sign of fire damage. Not the bed frame, not the sheets, not even the pillow beneath her head. "Fire doesn't behave this way," says Dr. Camille Torres, fire investigation specialist. "It's physically impossible for a fire to consume a mattress so completely without spreading to surrounding materials. It violates the basic laws of thermodynamics." The night before her death, Margaret's maid reported hearing her mistress speaking to someone in her room, though she was known to be alone. When the maid knocked, Margaret fell silent. Through the door, the maid heard only the sound of papers rustling. Likely the Holloway family Bible that was later found open on Margaret's desk. Its pages turned to obscure genealogical records dating back centuries. The official cause of death: accidental fire. The containment of the flames: unexplained. But the pattern was only beginning to emerge. When we examined the Holloway family correspondence from this period, we discovered something chilling. 2 weeks before her death, Margaret had written to her cousin in England, "I've been tracing our lineage back through father's line. There's something wrong with the records. Names that repeat but shouldn't, dates that don't align. And every night since I began, I've dreamed of someone standing at the foot of my bed, watching. Someone who looks like me, but isn't. The letter was never sent. It was found in her desk drawer, sealed and addressed. The third death came just 1 year later. Harold Holloway, age 13, Jonathan's youngest son, was found in the family library with a broken neck. The medical examiner noted that the injury was consistent with a fall from significant height, at least 15 feet. But Harold was found in the center of the room, away from any balconies, staircases, or furniture. The ceiling in the library was just 9 feet high. The force required to cause that kind of cervical fracture is substantial, explains Dr. James Renfield, forensic pathologist. It's the kind of injury we see in diving accidents or falls from multiple stories. Not something that can happen to a boy standing on a flat surface in a room with a low ceiling. What makes Harold's death even more disturbing is what was found clutched in his hand. A small notebook containing crude drawings of a family tree. Next to certain names, including his father's and sister's, Harold had drawn small X marks. Next to his own name was written a single word, next. The Holloway family withdrew from public life after Harold's death. Thomas, the patriarch, sold his business interests and retired to the family estate. Neighbors reported hearing strange sounds from the property at night. Like many people walking, though no visitors came. Local newspapers speculated about a Holloway curse, but such talk was quickly suppressed. The family's influence ensured that investigations remained minimal, conclusions vague. In 1895, Thomas Holloway commissioned a family mausoleum on the property. An unusual structure with no windows and a single heavy door. Inside, he had 3 phrases carved above the crypts. Blood remembers, names carry weight, and most disturbing of all, they are never alone. Thomas died of natural causes in 1901, the only Holloway of his generation to do so. His wife followed in 1903, also of apparently natural causes. For a brief period, it seemed the pattern had broken. But what happened next would prove that whatever haunted the Holloway bloodline hadn't disappeared. It had merely gone dormant, waiting for the next generation to begin their own investigations into the family's past. When researchers examined Thomas Holloway's personal journal in 2018, they discovered entries suggesting he had known something was wrong long before the deaths began. In an entry dated 1871, just after purchasing the estate, he wrote, "I've done what was asked. I've brought the name back. May it protect those who carry it." A later entry, dated the night of Jonathan's death, contains only 5 words. It doesn't want to protect. As we close this first chapter in the Holloway tragedy, consider this. Genealogy websites report that searches for the name Holloway have increased 300% since 2019. People looking for connections, for lost branches of their family tree, for heritage, for identity. But some inheritances aren't listed in any public record. Some legacies can't be traced through DNA tests or birth certificates. Some things pass through blood alone. When the Great Depression descended upon America in 1929, most families worried about losing their wealth. The Holloways worried about losing something else entirely. Something that had been dormant for almost 2 decades. The second generation of Holloways had grown up with whispered warnings. Never research the family history. Never sleep in certain rooms of the estate. Never speak of the deaths that had come before. But silence, it seems, is no protection against some inheritances. On April 17, 1927, Lydia Holloway, granddaughter of Thomas and cousin to the deceased Jonathan, was found dead in her bedroom at the age of 33. The door was locked from the inside. The windows were sealed. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of poison, no indication of illness. The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation, but the medical examiner noted something unprecedented. Her lungs had collapsed simultaneously, as if subjected to extreme external pressure. Yet her chest and ribs showed no trauma whatsoever. It's as if the air was simply removed from her lungs. Dr. Eliza Montgomery, pulmonary specialist, explains as she reviews the autopsy report, "There's no medical precedent for this. Lungs don't just collapse inward without some physical cause. Most disturbing were the witness statements. Lydia's husband reported hearing her speaking to someone just minutes before her death. When he knocked on the door, she fell silent. He heard only the sound of pages turning. Likely the family Bible that was later found open on her desk turned to the same genealogical records Margaret had been studying decades earlier. Inside the Bible's margin, Lydia had written a single sentence. "It doesn't just watch us. It waits for recognition." The official cause of death: asphyxiation due to lung collapse. The mechanism: unexplained. The pattern had reawakened. 8 years later, on July 23, 1935, the Holloway family suffered another loss. Meredith Holloway, a 21-year-old champion swimmer who had competed nationally, drowned in the small lake on the family property. A lake she had swum across hundreds of times since childhood. The physics of the drowning make no sense, explains water safety expert Dr. Richard Torres. Meredith was found in just 6 feet of water. She was an Olympic-level swimmer. There were no signs of cramping, no head trauma, no evidence of a medical event like a seizure or heart attack. What makes Meredith's death particularly chilling is what she told her coach the day before. "When I enter the water, it feels like someone is already there, waiting. Not a presence beside me, inside me." Her coach dismissed it as pre-competition nerves. The next morning, gardeners found Meredith floating face down in the lake, her expression, according to witness statements, one of recognition, not fear. The autopsy revealed another impossibility. Water in her lungs matched the chemical composition of the lake, but was significantly colder, almost freezing, though the lake in July was a comfortable 72 degrees. The official cause of death: accidental drowning. The temperature discrepancy: unexplained. By now, local authorities had begun to take notice of the pattern. Detective Samuel Pierce launched an unofficial investigation, collecting records of the previous deaths and interviewing family members. His notes, recently discovered in county archives, reveal a man struggling to reconcile evidence with possibility. "The Holloways know more than they're saying," he wrote. "They fear something, but it's not the deaths themselves. It's recognition." The word appears repeatedly in their private correspondence, as if naming the pattern might strengthen it. Pierce's investigation came to an abrupt end when he was removed from duty after suffering what his colleagues described as a nervous collapse. His final report contained only a single sentence: "Some bloodlines carry more than genes." The investigation was quietly closed. For a brief period, it seemed the pattern had again gone dormant. The Holloway family, now keenly aware of their unusual history, took precautions. They divided the family property, separated households, even considered changing their surname. But on December 12, 1942, 6-year-old Esther Holloway became the youngest victim of whatever haunted the family line. Esther's death defies conventional explanation even by the standards of the Holloway case. At 2 a.m., her mother reported seeing Esther walking down the hallway toward the stairs, apparently sleepwalking. Concerned, she followed. But Esther seemed to vanish upon reaching the staircase. A frantic search of the house led to a horrifying discovery. Esther's body was found sitting upright in the basement, positioned in the center of the room, her eyes open. There were no signs of trauma, no indication of how she had died. The medical examiner could determine no cause of death. Her heart had simply stopped. What elevates this tragedy beyond the merely tragic are 3 details from the scene. First, the house's electrical system failed completely at precisely 3:33 a.m., according to stopped clocks throughout the home. Second, though the basement was unheated and the December night bitterly cold, Esther's body remained warm to the touch for almost 12 hours after her death, a biological impossibility. Third, and most disturbing, when investigators developed the film from a camera found in the basement, a camera no one in the family claimed to own, every photograph showed the same image: the empty basement, from the exact spot where Esther was found. The official cause of death: cardiac arrest. The circumstances: unexplained. By 1945, the Holloway family had begun to fragment. Some members fled to Europe, others to the western United States, all seeking escape from whatever followed their bloodline. But distance, it seems, offered no protection. Michael Holloway, age 32, a successful physician who had changed his name and settled in California, died suddenly on August 7, 1945, while having lunch with colleagues. Witnesses described a man who suddenly went rigid, stared at an empty chair across from him, and then collapsed. He was pronounced dead minutes later. The autopsy revealed no cause of death, no aneurysm, no heart failure, no poison. But when the hospital conducted a routine brain scan as part of the postmortem, they discovered something unprecedented in medical literature. Michael's brain showed clear signs of activity 3 minutes after clinical death had been pronounced. The EEG readings, preserved in medical archives, show patterns consistent with recognition and extreme fear, as if, even after death, Michael Holloway was perceiving something his colleagues could not. Most unsettling was what investigators found in Michael's apartment after his death: a locked drawer containing news clippings about each Holloway death dating back to 1878. On the back of each clipping, Michael had written the same phrase: "Recognition is reciprocal. The official cause of death: unknown. The post-mortem brain activity: unexplained." As the first half of the 20th century came to a close, the Holloway pattern had claimed 5 more lives, each death more inexplicable than the last. What had begun as seemingly impossible suicides and accidents had evolved into something that defied medical science itself. Researchers who have studied the case note a progression. The earlier deaths involved physical impossibilities: hangings without access, fires that didn't spread, falls without height. The later deaths involved biological impossibilities: lungs collapsing without pressure, drowning without struggle, brain activity after death. It was as if whatever haunted the Holloway line was learning, adapting, becoming more efficient in claiming its victims. The family's own awareness seemed to accelerate the pattern. Those who researched the deaths, who sought to understand the connection, who recognized the presence of something unexplained, they were invariably the next to die. Yet despite this clear warning, some Holloways continued to probe their cursed inheritance. Perhaps they believed knowledge would provide protection. Perhaps they thought understanding would lead to escape. They were wrong. In our next chapter, we'll explore the deaths that occurred between 1946 and 1965, including Robert Holloway, whose final words during a video conference, "I told you I'm not part of this," were captured on film just moments before his inexplicable death. We'll also examine the increasingly desperate measures the surviving Holloways took to break the pattern, measures that may have accelerated their doom. As the Holloway bloodline thinned, the deaths became more elaborate, more public, more difficult to conceal. And the pattern itself began to reveal a terrible logic, one that suggests not random tragedy, but purpose. What remains unclear is why the Holloway line was chosen. What debt were they paying? What ancient covenant had been broken? What recognition was being enforced generation after generation? Perhaps most troubling of all, if bloodlines can carry such burdens, what unseen inheritances might others carry, unaware of their own patterns yet to emerge? As America embraced the prosperity of the post-war era, the Holloway family retreated further from public life. Those who remained had adopted a set of unspoken rules: never sleep alone, never research family history, never speak the names of the dead. Yet these precautions would prove insufficient against what one Holloway journal referred to only as the inheritance. By 1950, the once prominent family had become little more than a local legend, their estate falling into disrepair, their business interests sold off, their social connections severed. They had become a family in hiding, not from public scrutiny, but from something far more persistent. Robert Holloway, age 38, had followed this strategy of isolation to its logical extreme. A brilliant engineer who had changed his name to Roberts, he lived alone in a Seattle apartment, maintaining no contact with other family members. His colleagues at Boeing described him as intensely private, but respected for his technical brilliance. On March 15, 1952, Robert participated in a video conference with colleagues, a rare technology at the time, using closed-circuit television systems developed for military applications. 12 minutes into the meeting, witnesses reported that Robert suddenly stiffened, looked towards something off camera, and said clearly, I told you I'm not part of this. The video recording, preserved in Boeing's archives, shows what happened next. Robert's expression changed from defiance to recognition. He opened his mouth as if to speak again, but no words came. Then he collapsed forward onto his desk. The camera shut off automatically. When colleagues reached his office 3 minutes later, Robert Holloway was dead. The autopsy revealed no cause of death, no heart attack, no stroke, no aneurysm. His body showed no signs of trauma or poison. He was, by all medical standards, in perfect health. Until he wasn't. What makes Robert's case significant is the video evidence, explains Dr. Helena Voss, who has studied the Holloway deaths extensively. It's the first time we have documentation of the moments before death, and those moments suggest recognition of something present but invisible to others. Most disturbing was what investigators found in Robert's apartment. Despite his attempts to disconnect from his family, his walls were covered with complex diagrams of the Holloway family tree. But unlike conventional genealogies, Robert's charts tracked patterns of death rather than birth, calculating intervals, mapping locations, searching for some mathematical logic in the tragedy. In his final journal entry, dated 1 day before his death, he wrote, "It found me despite the name change. It doesn't track by name but by blood. Recognition is mutual and binding. The official cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. The trigger, unexplained. The pattern accelerated." 3 years later, on November 29, 1955, Esther Holloway, named after her aunt who had died so mysteriously in 1942, became the youngest victim in the family's history. At just 6 years old, she was found in the basement of her family's Chicago home, in circumstances eerily similar to her namesake. Witnesses reported seeing Esther walking down the hallway at 2 a.m., apparently sleepwalking. Her father followed but lost sight of her at the top of the basement stairs. When he descended to search for her, he found Esther sitting upright in the center of the room, her eyes open but unseeing. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Like her aunt, there were no signs of trauma or illness. Like her aunt, the house's electrical system failed completely at precisely 3:33 a.m. And like her aunt, her body remained unnaturally warm for hours after death. The pattern was not just continuing, it was repeating with variations so slight they seemed almost experimental. The official cause of death, cardiac arrest. The repetition of circumstances, unexplained. By the late 1950s, the surviving Holloways had developed theories about their family curse. Letters exchanged between cousins, now preserved in university archives, reveal a desperate search for understanding. "It's not random," wrote Elizabeth Holloway to her cousin William in 1957. "It comes for those who recognize it, those who look too deeply into our history, those who speak the names of the dead. Knowledge is invitation." In response, William suggested a radical solution. Perhaps we must erase ourselves, not just hide the name but dissolve the line completely. No children, no continuation. Let it end with us. This pact of voluntary extinction might explain why birth rates in the Holloway family dropped dramatically in the following decades. But for those already born, the danger remained. On August 3, 1960, Michael Holloway, age 32, died during lunch with colleagues at the hospital where he worked as a respected neurologist. Like his namesake who had died in 1945, Michael suddenly went rigid, stared at an empty chair across from him, and collapsed. The repetition was precise, same first name, same age, same circumstances. But this time, the hospital was prepared. Within moments of his collapse, Michael was connected to advanced monitoring equipment. What they recorded defies medical explanation. Michael was pronounced dead at 12:17 p.m. At 12:20 p.m., 3 minutes later, his brain showed clear signs of activity. Not the random firing of dying neurons, but organized patterns consistent with conscious thought. For 7 minutes, Michael Holloway's brain remained active after death. The EEG readings, compared with those of his namesake from 1945, are identical, suggesting not just similar deaths, but the same death repeated across decades. It's as if the same experience was being imposed on different people, explains neurologist Dr. James Chun. The patterns show recognition, fear, and then something we've never seen before. A type of neural activity that has no classification in medical literature. The official cause of death, unknown. The post-mortem brain activity, unexplained. As the 1960s began, the Holloway family had been reduced to scattered individuals, many living under assumed names, most choosing to remain childless. They communicated rarely, fearing that acknowledgement of their connection might strengthen whatever followed their bloodline. But isolation provided no safety for the family's youngest generation. On February 17, 1965, 17-year-old Benjamin Holloway, one of the few who still carried the family name, committed an act so shocking it briefly brought national attention to the Holloway curse. Benjamin, described by teachers as quiet but brilliant, returned home from school and methodically murdered his parents and 8-year-old sister with a kitchen knife. He then took his own life using a shard of broken mirror, inflicting wounds so severe that responding officers described them as ritualistic. The scene was horrific, but what elevated it beyond conventional family tragedy was the letter found in Benjamin's pocket. They were many. I needed silence. They spoke through my sister most clearly. She was never alone in her room. I heard them whispering our names at night, our real names from before. I'm sorry. This was the only way to stop the recognition. Investigators found Benjamin's bedroom walls covered with drawings of faces, hundreds of them, all with similar features, all watching. Between the faces, he had written variations of a single phrase. They remember us from before. Child psychologists attributed the killings to untreated schizophrenia. The family's history of unusual deaths was briefly noted in police reports but considered irrelevant to the immediate tragedy. The case was closed. The Holloway name faded from headlines. The pattern, temporarily visible to the public, submerged once more. But researchers who have studied the case note disturbing connections. Benjamin's crime occurred on the exact 87th anniversary of Jonathan Holloway's impossible hanging. The mirror used in his suicide was a family heirloom, reportedly brought from England by Thomas Holloway in 1871. And most telling, investigators found the family Bible open on Benjamin's desk, turned to genealogical records dating back centuries. The same page that had been found open near other Holloway deaths. The pattern wasn't just continuing, explains historian Dr. Eleanor Pierce. It was completing some kind of cycle. The deaths were becoming more elaborate, more performative. As if whatever haunted the Holloway line was no longer content with simply taking lives, it wanted to make statements. By 1965, 12 members of the Holloway bloodline had died under circumstances that defied explanation. The family itself had nearly vanished, fragmented, hidden, erased from public records. But the pattern remained. Waiting, patient, persistent. What had begun as seemingly impossible deaths had evolved into something that challenged our understanding of life itself. Post-mortem consciousness, repeating circumstances across generations, deaths that echoed each other with mathematical precision. In our next chapter, we'll examine the modern era of the Holloway curse, beginning with the case of Clara Holloway, whose 1974 death introduced yet another impossible element. Footprints on the ceiling, identical to those found at Jonathan Holloway's death nearly a century earlier. As the family's numbers dwindled, the deaths became more elaborate, more symbolic, and the pattern itself began to suggest not just persistence, but purpose. A message written in blood and impossibility, waiting for someone to decipher its meaning. Perhaps most disturbing is the question that haunts researchers to this day. If the Holloway curse followed bloodlines rather than names, how many descendants might still carry this inheritance, unaware of their connection to this doomed lineage? And what might happen if they begin to recognize the pattern? By the early 1970s, the Holloway name had faded from public memory. The family estate had been demolished, their businesses sold, their social connections severed. Those who still carried the bloodline had scattered across the country, many changing their names, all avoiding any acknowledgement of their heritage. But distance and anonymity provided no protection against what one researcher would later call a hereditary haunting. On October 31, 1974, Clara Holloway, a 26-year-old graduate student in psychology at Columbia University, was found hanging in her Manhattan apartment. The scene bore a disturbing resemblance to the death of Jonathan Holloway nearly a century earlier. Clara's body was suspended from a ceiling fixture, a decorative light that engineering experts confirmed could not have supported her weight. Yet the fixture remained intact, unbroken, securely fastened to the ceiling. The physics are impossible, explains structural engineer Dr. Raymond Chun. That fixture was rated to hold no more than 15 pounds. Clara weighed approximately 130 pounds. The fixture should have torn free from the ceiling immediately, but it didn't. More disturbing still were the marks found on the ceiling surrounding the fixture. Circular impressions identified by forensic experts as bare footprints. Human footprints walking across the ceiling. The prints matched Clara's feet exactly. The official investigation focused on more conventional explanations: suicide, murder, accident, but could establish no plausible scenario. The apartment door had been locked from the inside. The windows were sealed. There were no signs of struggle. What elevated Clara's death beyond conventional mystery was what investigators found in her research notes. Clara had been writing her doctoral dissertation on inherited trauma and familial memory, a study of how traumatic experiences could affect descendants across multiple generations. Among her papers was a folder labeled Family Case Study, containing newspaper clippings, death certificates, and hand-drawn family trees documenting each Holloway death since 1878. Clara had been researching her own cursed inheritance, apparently unaware that such research had preceded death for previous generations. Her final journal entry, dated the night before her death, reads, "I've found the pattern. It's not just following bloodlines. It's recreating specific deaths across generations, with variations. Each death is a repetition of a previous one, but with a new element added. It's not just killing, it's composing, creating a message written across time." The entry continues, "Tonight I felt someone watching me from the corner of the ceiling. When I looked up, I saw footprints forming, one after another, as if someone were walking upside down. I recognize what's happening. I've invited recognition through my research." The journal ends with a single sentence: "Whatever walks with our bloodline isn't outside us. It's within. Carried. Inherited." The official cause of death: suicide. The ceiling fixture's integrity and the footprints: unexplained. Clara's death marked the beginning of what researchers now call the modern phase of the Holloway pattern. Deaths that not only defied physical explanation but seemed designed to attract attention, to be discovered, to be studied. As if whatever haunted the family line was no longer content to remain hidden. 3 years later, on June 12, 1977, Joel Holloway, a 22-year-old forest ranger in Colorado, was found dead on a hiking trail he patrolled daily. The medical examiner determined that Joel had suffered injuries consistent with a fall from extreme height, at least 100 feet. But the trail where he was found was flat, bordered by open meadows. The nearest cliff was 3 miles away. The nearest tree was a 20-foot pine, too far away and too short to explain his injuries. Joel's body showed the catastrophic damage of a high-velocity impact with solid ground. Every bone below his neck was shattered. Internal organs had ruptured from the force. Yet the ground where he was found showed no impact crater, no disturbance of the soil or surrounding vegetation. It was as if Joel Holloway had fallen from an impossible height, landed with devastating force, and then been gently placed on the undisturbed earth. In his pocket, investigators found a handwritten note: "Something pushed me down." The official cause of death: massive trauma consistent with a fall. The absence of any height from which to fall: unexplained. By the 1980s, the scattered survivors of the Holloway line had developed their own theories about what pursued them. Letters exchanged between distant cousins, many using different surnames, reveal a growing consensus. The pattern was not just killing them. It was studying them, learning from them, adapting to their attempts at escape. "It's intelligent," wrote one Holloway descendant to another in 1982. "It doesn't just follow rules, it creates them. Each death teaches it something new about us, about possibility, about the boundaries between life and death." This perception of intelligence behind the pattern might explain the increasingly complex nature of the deaths. each one more elaborate, more impossible, more symbolic than the last. On August 9, 1983, Victor Holloway, age 47, checked into room 333 at the Westfield Hotel in Chicago. He had no connection to Chicago, no business there, no reason to choose that specific hotel or room. The next morning, housekeeping found him dead on the floor. The autopsy revealed he had suffered a massive heart attack. There were no drugs in his system, no signs of foul play, no indication of previous heart problems. What makes Victor's death significant is not the manner of death, heart attacks are common, but the location. Research later revealed that room 333 at the Westfield Hotel had been the site of 2 previous Holloway deaths. Margaret Holloway's aunt had died there in 1902, and a distant cousin in 1947. There was no way Victor could have known this connection. The earlier deaths had occurred under different hotel names before computerized record-keeping. The room number had changed multiple times due to renovations. Yet somehow, Victor Holloway had been drawn to the exact same space where his ancestors had died, as if the location itself were part of the pattern. The official cause of death: myocardial infarction. The selection of the precise location: unexplained. As the Holloway deaths continued through the 1980s, they began to attract academic attention. Parapsychologists, medical researchers, and forensic specialists from various universities began collecting data, looking for scientific explanations for what appeared to be a genuine family curse. What makes the Holloway case unique is the consistency, explains Dr. Marcus Freeman, who has studied the family for decades. Most alleged family curses are vague: bad luck, illness, tragedy. But the Holloway deaths follow specific patterns: physical impossibilities, repetition across generations, evidence of recognition before death, and a progressive complexity that suggests adaptation. This academic interest would prove fatal for at least one researcher. In 1987, Dr. Elizabeth Chun, a neurologist studying the post-mortem brain activity recorded in the Michael Holloway cases, died suddenly while reviewing the EEG readings. Her assistant found her slumped over her desk. The EEG printouts spread before her. The autopsy showed no cause of death. There were no drugs in her system, no evidence of heart failure, no aneurysm, no stroke. She was, by all medical standards, in perfect health. Until she wasn't. Most disturbing was what security cameras captured in her lab moments before her death. The lights flickering at precisely 3:33 p.m., and a brief shadow passing across Chen's face. A shadow with no discernible source. The official cause of death: unknown. The shadow: unexplained. Dr. Chun had no known blood connection to the Holloway family. Her death suggested something researchers had feared but could not prove. That mere study of the pattern might invite its attention. That recognition might flow both ways. The final death of this period occurred on December 21, 1990, when Daniel Holloway, one of the few remaining individuals still using the family name, was found in the basement of his Seattle home. The circumstances echoed the deaths of both Esther Holloways. He was sitting upright in the center of the room, eyes open, no signs of trauma or struggle. The house's electrical system had failed at precisely 3:33 a.m. His body remained unnaturally warm for hours after death. The medical examiner could determine no cause of death. What distinguished Daniel's case was what investigators found on his computer, one of the first instances of digital evidence in the Holloway pattern. Daniel had been using early internet forums to research his family history, connecting with distant relatives, piecing together the pattern that had claimed so many lives. His final message, posted at 3:32 a.m., read, "I found others, many others. The name changed but the blood remained. We're everywhere now, scattered, diluted, but still carrying it. It doesn't need concentration to survive. It just needs recognition." 1 minute later, his computer recorded a final keystroke, though by then, Daniel was already in the basement, already dead. The keystroke typed a single character, repeated hundreds of times. "We see you, we see you, we see you, we see you, we see you." The official cause of death: cardiac arrest. The post-mortem computer activity: unexplained. By 1990, the Holloway pattern had claimed 16 lives across 4 generations, each death defying conventional explanation. each adding new elements to an increasingly complex phenomenon. What had begun as seemingly impossible suicides and accidents had evolved into something that suggested conscious design. Deaths that not only took lives but communicated across time and space. Most disturbing was the expansion beyond the bloodline. Researchers, investigators, even casual acquaintances who recognized the pattern had begun to die under similar circumstances. As if the curse itself were breaking free of genetic constraints, reaching beyond blood to claim those who merely perceived its existence. In our next chapter, we'll examine the final documented Holloway deaths, culminating in the disappearance of Emily Holloway during the filming of a documentary about her family's tragic history. Her final recorded words, "They don't like to be remembered out loud," may hold the key to understanding what has haunted this bloodline for over a century. As the pattern accelerated toward its apparent conclusion, it left behind not just bodies but a message, encrypted in impossibility, written across generations, waiting for someone to decipher its meaning. A meaning that may extend far beyond one unfortunate family. As the new millennium approached, the Holloway bloodline had been reduced to a handful of individuals, most living under assumed names, all aware of the pattern that had claimed their ancestors. What remained of the family had scattered across continents, severing all connections, avoiding any acknowledgement of their heritage. Yet distance provided no protection against what one researcher called a pattern that travels through blood, not space. On March 17, 1991, Dr. Sarah Holloway, a 34-year-old physician who had changed her name to Hale, died suddenly while reviewing medical records in her Boston office. The circumstances echoed previous Holloway deaths. No apparent cause, no signs of struggle, no evidence of illness or injury. What distinguished Sarah's case was the security camera footage captured moments before her death. The hospital's surveillance system recorded Sarah working alone at her desk when she suddenly stiffened, looked up toward the ceiling, and spoke a single sentence. "I know what you've been trying to show us." The camera then malfunctioned for exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds. When the feed resumed, Sarah was slumped over her desk, already dead. The autopsy revealed no cause of death, no heart attack, no stroke, no aneurysm. But the medical examiner noted something unprecedented. Sarah's brain tissue showed abnormalities consistent with extreme old age, despite her being only 34 years old. It was as if her brain had aged decades in minutes, explains neurologist Dr. James Chun. We see this kind of cellular deterioration in patients with advanced dementia or extreme radiation exposure. But there's no medical mechanism that could cause such rapid aging. Most disturbing was what investigators found in Sarah's research. She had been studying genetic memory, the controversial theory that experiences could be passed down through generations via DNA. Her notes revealed a startling hypothesis: that trauma could create epigenetic markers, passed from parent to child, carrying not just predispositions but actual memories. Her final journal entry reads, "It's not a curse. It's not a haunting. It's memory. Collective memory stored in our very cells, activated when we become aware of it. Recognition is the key that unlocks it. And once unlocked, it can't be contained again." The official cause of death: unknown. The accelerated brain aging: unexplained. As the Holloway deaths continued through the 1990s, they began to attract wider academic attention. Universities established research teams dedicated to studying the pattern. Medical journals published case studies. Documentary filmmakers proposed projects tracing the family's history. This attention would prove fatal for those who came too close to understanding. On November 9, 1994, Professor Alan Davidson, a geneticist with no known connection to the Holloway bloodline, died suddenly while reviewing DNA samples from surviving Holloway descendants. His assistant found him slumped over his microscope, a look of recognition frozen on his face. The autopsy revealed no cause of death. But Davidson's final research notes, written moments before his death, contain a startling observation. The Holloway DNA contains a sequence I've never seen before, a pattern in the junk DNA that appears to be structured, almost like encoded information. It's not random. It's not natural. It's as if something has been writing itself into their genetic code for generations. The note ends abruptly with a single sentence. "It saw me seeing it. The official cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. The DNA anomalies, unexplained. By the mid-1990s, the scattered survivors of the Holloway line had developed a desperate strategy: complete erasure. They changed names, altered public records, severed all family connections. Some underwent cosmetic surgery to change their appearance. Others moved to remote locations, avoiding all digital footprints. They understood that knowledge was the trigger, that recognition activated whatever waited in their blood. But erasure provided no protection for those who already knew. On February 23, 1997, Thomas Green, born Thomas Holloway before legally changing his name, checked into room 333 at the Blackwood Hotel in Seattle. Like Victor Holloway 14 years earlier, he had no connection to Seattle, no business there, no reason to choose that specific hotel or room. The next morning, housekeeping found him dead on the floor. The autopsy revealed he had suffered a massive heart attack, identical to Victor's. There were no drugs in his system, no signs of foul play, no indication of previous heart problems. What makes Thomas's death significant is not just the repeat of Victor's circumstances, but what investigators found in his possession: a hand-drawn map of the United States with red circles marking the locations of every Holloway death since 1878. Next to Seattle, he had written, "It needs me to complete the pattern." Thomas Green had deliberately placed himself in the path of whatever haunted his bloodline. He had chosen to participate in the pattern rather than flee from it. His journal, found in his hotel room, explains why. "We can't escape it. Running just delays the inevitable. But if I go willingly to where it wants me, perhaps I can learn something before the end. Perhaps I can see it clearly enough to understand." The final entry, written the night before his death. "I felt it enter the room at midnight. Not hostile, patient, ancient, waiting for recognition. I recognize you. I always have. The official cause of death, myocardial infarction. The deliberate participation in the pattern, unexplained." As the millennium approached, the Holloway pattern accelerated toward what researchers now believe was its intended conclusion. The deaths became more public, more theatrical, more explicitly designed to be discovered and studied. As if whatever had haunted the bloodline for generations was finally ready to be seen. On July 7, 1999, Joel Holloway, who had kept his family name despite the risks, was found dead on a hiking trail in Montana. The circumstances echoed the death of his namesake in 1977. Injuries consistent with a fall from extreme height, found on flat ground with no nearby cliffs or trees. But this Joel had been prepared. He was wearing a body camera technology that had not been available to his predecessor. The camera recorded his final moments, providing the first visual documentation of a Holloway death in progress. The footage, now secured in university archives, shows Joel hiking alone on a sunny afternoon. At 3:30 p.m., he stops suddenly and looks up toward the sky. His expression changes from confusion to recognition. He speaks a single sentence. "Is this what you needed us to see?" 3 minutes later, the camera captures a sudden sensation of movement, a violent upward acceleration, as if Joel were being lifted into the air. The footage becomes chaotic, spinning, showing glimpses of the ground far below, the sky, the distant horizon. Then, just as suddenly, downward acceleration. The camera captures Joel's shadow growing rapidly on the ground below as he falls from an impossible height. His final words, spoken calmly despite his plummeting descent. "Something pushed me down." The impact is not shown, the camera cuts out seconds before. When hikers found Joel's body hours later, the ground beneath him was undisturbed. No impact crater, no disturbed soil. As if he had fallen from hundreds of feet up, yet landed with the gentleness of a feather. Forensic analysis of the footage confirms its authenticity. There are no signs of editing or manipulation. The perspective and acceleration match the physics of a genuine fall from approximately 300 feet. But there was nothing in the area from which Joel could have fallen. The official cause of death, massive trauma consistent with a fall. The footage, unexplained. The final documented death in the Holloway pattern occurred on October 31, 2001. exactly 123 years after the first recorded death of Jonathan Holloway. Emily Holloway, age 19, was participating in a documentary about her family history, the first Holloway descendant willing to speak publicly about the pattern that had claimed so many lives. A film crew had accompanied her to the site of the original Holloway estate in Massachusetts, now an empty field with no trace of the house that once stood there. The crew's footage shows Emily standing in the center of the field, explaining the family's tragic history to the camera. At precisely 3:30 p.m., she stops mid-sentence and looks towards something off-camera. The audio captures her saying, "They're here. They've always been here." The camera operator reported that Emily then walked away from the crew, moving with purpose toward the far end of the field. The footage shows her receding figure, then cuts out completely at 3:33 p.m., the result of a total equipment failure affecting all cameras, microphones, and lights simultaneously. When power was restored 3 minutes later, Emily Holloway had vanished. A search of the area found no trace of her. Police investigations discovered no evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle, no indication of where she might have gone. Emily Holloway had simply disappeared. 3 days later, a local resident called police to report a discovery at the Holloway estate site. Emily's body, lying peacefully on the ground exactly where the master bedroom of the original house would have stood. She appeared to have been dead for several days, though she had vanished only hours earlier. The autopsy revealed no cause of death, no trauma, no poison, no disease. Emily Holloway was, by all medical standards, in perfect health. Until she wasn't. What makes Emily's death the most significant in the entire Holloway pattern was what investigators found with her body. A digital audio recorder, still running despite having been recording continuously for 3 days, far beyond its battery capacity. The recorder contained a single audio file, 3 minutes and 33 seconds of Emily's voice, repeating a single phrase over and over. "They don't like to be remembered out loud." Forensic analysis confirmed that the voice was indeed Emily's, but could not determine when the recording had been made. The timestamps indicated it had been recorded during the 3 minutes when she was missing, when the recording device itself was still in her hotel room, miles away. The official cause of death, unknown. The recording, unexplained. Emily Holloway's death marked the apparent conclusion of the pattern that had claimed 14 lives across 123 years. After 2001, no further deaths matching the Holloway characteristics have been officially documented. The family name itself has vanished from public records. The bloodline, as far as researchers can determine, has been extinguished, either through deliberate childlessness or through the pattern's relentless culling. Yet questions remain. If the pattern followed blood rather than names, how many descendants might still exist, unaware of their connection to the doomed lineage? If recognition was the trigger, how many potential victims remain in ignorance, protected only by their lack of knowledge? And perhaps most disturbing, if the pattern has truly concluded, what was its purpose? What message was being written across generations, in the language of impossible deaths? In our final chapter, we'll examine the theories that have emerged from decades of research into the Holloway pattern, theories that range from genetic curses to quantum entanglement to something older and darker. The possibility that some bloodlines carry burdens that science cannot yet explain. As one researcher noted in her final paper before abandoning the field entirely, the Holloway pattern was not random killing. It was systematic revelation. Each death revealed something about the boundaries between life and death, between memory and inheritance, between individual identity and collective consciousness. The pattern wasn't just taking lives. It was showing us something about life itself. A message written in blood and impossibility, waiting for someone to decipher its meaning. In January 2019, a letter arrived at the Bristol Medical Examiner's office in England. It contained no return address, no signature, just a single sentence typed on plain paper. The name doesn't need to be said to be inherited. Forensic analysis revealed nothing unusual about the paper or ink. The postmark showed it had been mailed from London, but efforts to trace its origin led nowhere. The letter might have been dismissed as a prank if not for one disturbing detail. It arrived exactly 148 years after Thomas Holloway purchased the Massachusetts estate where so many of his descendants would meet impossible ends. This letter, the first documented communication potentially connected to the Holloway pattern since Emily's death in 2001, raised a chilling possibility that whatever haunted the Holloway bloodline had not concluded its work. It had merely gone dormant, waiting. The timing cannot be coincidental, explains Dr. Helena Voss, who has studied the Holloway case for decades. Every significant event in the pattern occurred on an anniversary of some previous Holloway death. The letter's arrival precisely 148 years after the family's American beginning suggests continuity. But continuity of what? And for what purpose? After nearly 150 years and 14 documented deaths, researchers have developed several theories about what haunted the Holloway bloodline, theories that range from the scientific to the supernatural, from genetic anomalies to something older and darker than modern understanding can encompass. The first theory, proposed by geneticist Dr. Rebecca Chin, suggests a biological explanation, that the Holloway lineage carried a previously unknown genetic disorder that affected brain function in specific ways, creating shared hallucinations and triggering sudden death. There are prion diseases that cause both hallucinations and sudden death, explains Dr. Chan. It's possible the Holloway family carried a unique variant that activated only under specific neurological conditions, perhaps triggered by awareness of the family history itself. This theory might explain some elements of the pattern, the medical impossibilities, the consistent age of onset, even the apparent transfer to researchers who studied the family closely. Exposure to biological materials could have transmitted the condition. But it fails to explain the physical impossibilities. Bodies hanging from unreachable heights, footprints on ceilings, falls without sources, drownings that defied physics. No known biological mechanism could account for these elements. A second theory, developed by quantum physicist Dr. James Morrow, proposes something more exotic, that the Holloway bloodline experienced a form of quantum entanglement across generations, a linking of consciousness that transcended conventional time and space. Quantum physics has demonstrated that particles can remain connected regardless of distance. Dr. Morrow explains, if consciousness has quantum properties, as some theories suggest, it's possible the Holloway family experienced a form of entanglement that linked them not just to each other, but to some other consciousness. This theory might explain the apparent intelligence behind the pattern, the way it learned, adapted, and communicated across generations. It might explain the impossible physics, the predictable timing, the sense of recognition that preceded each death. But it fails to explain why this particular family was affected, or what purpose such an entanglement might serve. A third theory, and perhaps the most disturbing, was proposed by anthropologist Dr. Eleanor Pierce after studying the Holloway family's origins in medieval England. Her research suggests that the pattern may have begun long before 1878, that what appeared to be the beginning was merely the emergence of a much older phenomenon. The earliest records of the Holloway name date to a small village in northern England circa 1400, Dr. Pierce explains. Local folklore describes a family that carried death in their blood, a lineage that could see what others could not, whose members died in ways that defied explanation. Pierce's research uncovered church records documenting a series of deaths in the original Holloway family, deaths that mirror those of their American descendants centuries later. Impossible hangings, contained fires, falls without sources. The pattern didn't begin in 1878, Pierce concludes. It merely resumed after a period of dormancy. Something in the bloodline was activated when Thomas Holloway returned to America, something that had been waiting for generations. This theory might explain the pattern's apparent purpose. Not random killing, but systematic revelation. A message being communicated through the language of impossible deaths, written across centuries. But what was the message? And to whom was it being communicated? The most comprehensive analysis of the Holloway pattern was conducted by a multidisciplinary team at Stanford University from 2003 to 2008. Their report, published posthumously after the project's lead researcher died suddenly of unknown causes, proposed a framework for understanding the pattern's apparent logic. The Holloway deaths follow a mathematical progression, each building on those that came before, adding new elements while repeating core motifs. This suggests not random tragedy but composition, as if each death were a sentence in a paragraph, each generation a page in a book. The report identified 4 distinct phases in the pattern. Phase 1, 1878 to 1910 physical impossibilities, deaths that violated the laws of physics in observable ways. Phase 2, 1927 to 1965 biological impossibilities, deaths that violated the laws of biology, including postmortem consciousness. Phase 3, 1974 to 1990 symbolic impossibilities, deaths that recreated previous patterns but added new symbolic elements, suggesting communication. Phase 4, 1991 to 2001 revelatory impossibilities, deaths that seemed designed to be documented and studied, culminating in Emily's final message. They don't like to be remembered out loud. This progression suggests a pattern moving toward revelation, as if each death were unveiling something that existed at the boundary between known and unknown reality. The report's final conclusion remains controversial among researchers. The Holloway pattern demonstrates characteristics consistent with non-human intelligence, an entity or entities existing beyond conventional perception, capable of manipulating physical reality, accessing human consciousness, and persisting across generations. In other words, something was using the Holloway bloodline to communicate. Something ancient, something patient, something that existed within the family's very DNA, activated by recognition transmitted through blood. The report ends with a warning that many researchers have taken seriously. If the pattern follows blood rather than names, and if the Holloway lineage has dispersed as widely as genealogical records suggest, there may be thousands of individuals carrying this genetic heritage, potential vessels for whatever consciousness has been attempting to emerge through this family. This warning may explain why research into the Holloway pattern has diminished in recent years. Multiple universities have discontinued their studies. Several prominent researchers have abandoned the field entirely. Archives containing Holloway materials have restricted access. It is as if the academic community has collectively decided that some knowledge is too dangerous to pursue, that recognition itself might be contagious. Yet questions remain. If the Holloway pattern truly concluded with Emily's death in 2001, what was the final message? What revelation was being built toward across 14 impossible deaths and 123 years? And if the pattern has not concluded, if it has merely gone dormant again, waiting for new vessels to recognize it, how will it manifest in the modern era of genetic testing, digital surveillance, and global connectivity? The mysterious letter received in Bristol in 2019 suggests a disturbing possibility, that the pattern has not ended but evolved, that it no longer requires the Holloway name to find its vessels, that blood alone is sufficient. Genealogical researchers estimate that the Holloway bloodline, diluted across generations, could exist in as many as 4,000 living individuals, most unaware of their connection to this doomed lineage, most protected by their ignorance, until they begin to research their family history, until they recognize the pattern, until they speak the names of the dead. In 2020, genetic testing company Ancestry DNA reported an unusual surge in customer inquiries about connections to the Holloway lineage, inquiries that came after several popular true crime podcasts featured the family's tragic history. The company has since removed all references to the Holloway name from their databases. Their official statement cites privacy concerns. Internal sources suggest another motivation. Multiple employees who processed Holloway-related inquiries reported strange experiences. Power fluctuations at precisely 3:33, sensations of being watched, dreams of footprints on ceilings. 3 of these employees have since died of unknown causes. The pattern continues. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Holloway case is what it suggests about heredity itself, about what we carry in our blood beyond mere genetics, about memories that might be transmitted not through stories but through DNA, about consciousness that might exist not just within individuals but across bloodlines, persisting through generations. As Dr. Sarah Holloway wrote in her final journal entry before her death in 1991, "It's not a curse. It's not a haunting. It's memory, collective memory stored in our very cells, activated when we become aware of it. Recognition is the key that unlocks it." If she was right, what other memories might lie dormant in human bloodlines? What other patterns wait for recognition? What other consciousnesses might awaken when acknowledged? The Holloway pattern suggests a disturbing possibility, that we are never truly alone within ourselves, that we carry multitudes in our blood, ancestors, memories, perhaps even others, entities that exist between the boundaries of conventional identity, waiting for recognition to emerge. As Emily Holloway's final recorded words warned, they don't like to be remembered out loud. Perhaps there is wisdom in forgetting, in silence, in looking away from patterns that look back when recognized. But human curiosity is persistent. The drive to understand, to know, to name the unknown. It compels us forward, even into darkness, even when that darkness might be watching us approach. For those who have studied the Holloway pattern, one question remains paramount. If recognition activates whatever waits in the blood, has this very documentary awakened something that might otherwise have remained dormant? By speaking the names of the dead, by tracing their impossible ends, by recognizing the pattern that connected them, have we invited recognition in return? The letter that arrived in Bristol in 2019 suggests an answer. A warning. A promise. The name doesn't need to be said to be inherited. Look away if you can. Forget what you've learned here if possible. But know this, patterns, once recognized, cannot be unseen. And some inheritances activate simply through awareness of their existence. They are patient. They are persistent. They wait for recognition. And they remember those who recognize them. For over a century, the Holloway family carried something beyond wealth, beyond status, beyond even their name. They carried a pattern that defied explanation. 14 deaths across 123 years, each impossible in its own way, each building upon those that came before. What began as a documentary investigation into a family tragedy has revealed something more profound. Questions about the very nature of inheritance itself, about what flows through bloodlines beyond mere genetics, about memories embedded in DNA, consciousness that persists across generations, patterns that activate through recognition. The Holloway case challenges our understanding of reality itself, of the boundaries between life and death, between individual and collective identity, between past and present. It suggests that some inheritances cannot be escaped, only postponed. That some patterns, once established, complete themselves regardless of our awareness or acceptance. As we conclude this exploration of one family's impossible tragedy, we're left with questions that extend far beyond the Holloway bloodline. What other patterns wait dormant in human history, in human genetics, in human consciousness? What other messages are being written across generations in languages we're only beginning to decipher? What other inheritances might activate through recognition? And perhaps most unsettling, by documenting the Holloway pattern, by speaking their names, by tracing their impossible ends, have we ourselves become part of that pattern? The letter that arrived in Bristol in 2019 offers a final warning. The name doesn't need to be said to be inherited. Some patterns transcend names. Some inheritances flow through blood alone. Some recognitions are mutual, we see them, and they see us in return. The Holloway bloodline may have vanished from public records, but patterns, once established, rarely end cleanly. They evolve. They adapt. They wait. Perhaps there is wisdom in the final recorded words of Emily Holloway. They don't like to be remembered out loud. Perhaps some mysteries should remain unexplored, some patterns unrecognized, some names unspoken. But human curiosity is persistent. The drive to understand, to know, to name the unknown. It compels us forward, even into darkness, even when that darkness might be looking back. If this investigation into the Holloway bloodline has captivated you as deeply as it has haunted me, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We dive into unexplained mysteries, historical anomalies, and cases that challenge our understanding of reality. Hit the notification bell to ensure you never miss our uploads. Though be warned, some knowledge cannot be unlearned once recognized. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced unexplained patterns in your own family history? Are there deaths or coincidences that defy conventional explanation? Or perhaps it's wiser not to speak such things aloud. Remember, recognition flows both ways. When we look into the darkness of human history, sometimes that darkness looks back. Until next time, stay curious, but perhaps stay cautious as well.